What's up, guys? Welcome to the Orange Crushin It Podcast, a Jenks Island production. I'm your host, Ty McGee, aka Orange Crushin It. And in today's episode, I'm going to bring you my ideal offseason for the Denver Broncos and what that roster will look like in the 2026-2027 season. But before we jump into that, I want to give you guys a little bit of an intro to the podcast. If you've been following the Jenks Island podcast, obviously I've been contributing over there for about over a year now to, the season stuff, the post season stuff with the draft, free agency, et cetera, throughout the offseason. And I will continue to do so, for the foreseeable future. And, we'll be on tomorrow's episode breaking down some of the draft prospects for the offensive line room. But I've been producing some content for the Denver Broncos on my Instagram, my TikTok, and my Twitter. And if you've been watching the podcast again, I'm a huge Denver Broncos fan. So wanted to bring this to a different forum, wanted to bring this to the Jenks Island crew, in case there's any Denver Broncos fans out there that are some subscribers. So, and if you're not, if you're a Denver Broncos fan that's just listening and tuning in for the first time, make sure you subscribe, tune into the Jenks Island podcast. We have a lot of really good content over there throughout the season and then some more fun stuff throughout the offseason. And kind of, the best part, I think, is breaking down some of the draft prospects over the next couple of weeks. We get more in depth. We have a lot of different opinions and, it's kind of different than what you might hear on national television. It's maybe a little bit more of an understandable breakdown for some of you guys out there. So, but with that being said, I'm going to do this probably week over week as much as I can, kind of just break down different topics for the Denver Broncos. And, with the draft stuff coming up, just kind of break down different prospects that I think are really good fits for the Denver Broncos. So, but with that being said, let's jump into the offseason simulator and kind of, walk through the re-signing period, trades, free agency, and the NFL draft. And then, like I said, show you guys the end roster from all of these moves. So let's go. And I'm using Stick to the Model, which is a offseason simulator that I found kind of been trending on Twitter right now, has all of the different phases of the offseason. Seems like a lot of the logic there is really good as far as, contracts and trade logic and all that good stuff. So especially with the restructures as well. So more advanced stuff there. And this guy keeps, making new additions to it. So it's really good stuff. If you guys haven't had a chance, check it out and use this. But I'm going to walk you guys through this first. So a lot of the moves that we're going to make for the cap management portion of this are going to fall in the offensive line room. And the first one that we're going to do is restructure Mike McGlinchey. McGlinchey obviously has been a great tackle for us, the past couple of years, but he's got a huge cap hit. That $23.8 million cap hit can definitely be cut down a little bit. Garrett Bowles is at 8.5. Obviously, every contract is different, but, I don't quite think that McGlinchey's playing up to this level. So we're going to give him a restructure. We kind of floated this a little bit last offseason too. So that gives us, about $7.9 million in cap space. The next move we're going to make is a guy on the opposite side of the line in Ben Powers. There's talks about restructuring him, talks about cutting him. I'm going to go with the cut route because I think that there is a guy in-house that can replace him. We'll talk about him in a little bit. But, if you look at this cut and we designate him as a post-June 1 cut, it pretty much cuts the dead money down in this year by half and gives us a lot more cap savings this offseason, which is critical because we need to take advantage of that Super Bowl window that we have with Bo Nix while he's under that rookie contract. Obviously, we almost made it this past season if he didn't get hurt. So, really the offseason dive in, especially with the Russell Wilson money coming off the books. So post-June 1 for Ben Powers. And then we're going to go down to Matt Pert. Matt Pert, was that swing tackle for us. Frank Crum kind of took over that role. Alex Belcheski also took over that role. $4 million, not a ton of savings, actually $3.5 million in savings. But, you just don't need to be paying a swing tackle that much if he's not going to be playing, quite honestly. So you can draft someone who could fill this role or find someone probably for cheaper like Frank Crum. I think he was undrafted free agent or 7th-round pick. So, and he stepped up into that role. So we're going to cut Pert. And the last one is going to be to restructure Quinn Miners. Now, Quinn, obviously, he's going to be here for a long time. D3 product, just like myself and Jenks and Hammer. He's going to be a stalwart on this defensive line for a really long time. And so with that being said, we're going to restructure him with a void year. Now, the void year kind of is a prorated bonus that you're pushing out. And with guys that you're going to re-sign or eventually, extend their contract, you're not really concerned with the void year because that money just ends up, being figured out anyways. If you were going to get rid of a guy and ended up having to pay him, $11 million or whatever it may be in that void year, you don't love that. It's kind of like the dead money at that point, but you're going to re-sign Quinn at some point in time in his age 30 season, I guess it would be, because he's 27. He's got 3 years remaining. So not concerned about the money there. Just want the cap savings now. And the last one is going to be another guy who signed kind of a cap-friendly deal this past season, more flexible, just because of his injury history, and it was kind of a prove-it deal. We're going to restructure Talanoa Hufanga. And I just want to put this out there, right? When you restructure guys, it's not because, sometimes it's because they're playing poorly, but in a lot of cases, it's because you want to add to the team. They're still going to get their money, whether that's in a bonus or however, maybe pushed out to a later offseason. But you want to take advantage of the Super Bowl window. And the guys on the Denver Broncos, they want to win Super Bowls, right? Hufanga came here for a reason. It's to win a Super Bowl with the Denver Broncos. And so I think he's the type of guy that would be willing to take a restructured contract. It's not even a pay cut. It's just a restructured contract. And so we're going to restructure him. And with all those moves, that gets us to about $71.6 million, which has been the number pretty accurately that's floated around, right, of what can Denver get to with restructures. Some of the restructures involve Greenlaw, involve Evan Ingram. I think this is best case scenario. We hang on to those guys and we restructure some of the bigger cap hits. Ingram's cap hit isn't that much of a hit at the end of the day with his restructure. Wouldn't want to get rid of Greenlaw. So I think I'm pretty comfortable with these moves. Next up, we're going to move into the trade section. So how Stick to the Model works, they give you some different trades that, kind of suggested trades, but you can also build your own. And I'm going to build my own using Bill Barnwell's trade that he proposed on ESPN for A.J. Brown. Now, Stick to the Model doesn't love this trade. Again, I think it's a good model, but, Bill Barnwell's got his ear to the news, and I think he kind of knows a thing or two. So it's going to be A.J. Brown and a 2026 fifth-round pick at pick 151 for Riley Moss. And I'll talk a bit about Riley in a minute. Riley Moss, our second-round pick this year, and our seventh-round pick in 2027. Now, I know that losing Riley kind of hurts, right? Because I think Riley came on in a strong way this season. But I know there's a lot of fans out there that aren't big fans of Riley Moss, to be honest. That they see the penalties and some of the longer plays allowed, and they say, we could do better than that. And, the reality is we have a loaded cornerback room with Chris Abrams-Drain proving he could be a starting caliber corner, with Jaquan McMillan, with, adding Johnny Barron this past offseason. So, you don't need 5 starting caliber corners. Is it nice to have? Yes. But if you can package Riley in a trade like this for a bona fide superstar in A.J. Brown, who's going to become your wide receiver 1 and push Courtland Sutton to wide receiver 2 and almost open up more opportunities for him, you do it. You do it immediately. And for Philly, there's that synergy with Riley Moss and Cooper DeJean, not because they're just exciting whites, but both guys played at Iowa as well. I think they could add to that cornerback room, have DeJean in the slot and Riley and Quignon outside. They kind of had a revolving door at that cornerback 2 position with Keely Ringo, Adoree Jackson. They just haven't found their guy, especially since Slay. They cut Darius Slay and James Bradbury went out the door. So I think that this is a beneficial trade for both sides. They get a second-round pick too, which is, sucks for us, and we'll not be, not going to love that when we get to this draft portion. But at the end of the day, I think it's a good deal because, again, like I said, you're getting a bona fide superstar, one of the best wide receivers in the league. So with that, we're going to move past the trade portion. I don't think, Michael Mayer, maybe, don't see any of these trades in division happening. Jalen Ramsey, don't love that at all. We don't really need depth at cornerback, and definitely not a guy with that kind of cap hit. Garrett Williams, Bobby Okereke, none of these guys are moving the needle for me. And I don't really think that Denver's going to be wheeling and dealing outside of a trade for maybe A.J. Brown. So now we move into free agency. And first up, we move into our RFA tenders. Now, how the RFA tenders work, it's a restricted free agent. So you have the right to match any contract that they get. But with an RFA tender, if you tender them at, say, the second round level, if you don't match that contract, you get a second round pick in return. So a second round pick for Jaquan McMillan is great value. I think, he's obviously a great player, but a second round pick, especially with having lost one in the A.J. Brown trade, is awesome. Or if you can have him for $5.8 million, that's also awesome. I don't, you know, I could see it either way. I could see someone giving him more money than that, but I just don't know if they want to pass up a second round pick for him. So, not only would you have to pay him, probably $10 million, but also getting up a second round pick is not easy. The next guy was going to be Alex Palczewski, and I talked about him earlier. He's kind of, that rotational lineman for us who play tackle. He played some guard as well, obviously for Ben Powers a ton this past season. But I think Palczewski can step up into that starting guard role. You tender him at the second round level. I don't think that's too much money for this guy. $5.8 million. Think about what we were paying Ben Powers. I think his cap hit was at least double this, maybe triple, quadruple, right? I think it was in the 15s to 20s range. So, and I don't think a team's going to want to pass up or offer up a second round pick for an offensive lineman that, quite frankly, hasn't played many games. We are taking a shot on him, and I think there's room to add to that offensive line room later on, maybe through the draft. But this is going to be our projected starting guard as of the start of 2026, or at least the end of this offseason. So tender McMillan, tender Palczewski, and kind of I don't love tendering any of these other guys, and we'll talk about Atkins and McLaughlin a little bit later on, but I think that they'll be back with this team as well. So confirm those tenders. And then we move into the offseason and free agency. And the first thing that we want to do is bring back and retain all of our exclusive rights free agents, their league minimum values. And if you can get a guy like Adondre Tillman, who was an absolute stud for this past season as a rotational guy, has a lot of flexibility to play inside and outside because of his size, but his speed as well. And 2 interceptions. I mean, for the big fella, that's pretty awesome too. So he can do it all for this Vance Joseph defense, and that's what Vance loves to see, a versatile guy that can help him make this defense so much more complicated. And like I said, we're going to retain them all. $1 million. That's a drop in the bucket at this point in time. The other 2 guys, I just mentioned them, that we are going to resign for league minimum is going to be Jaleel McLaughlin on a 1-year deal, and Nate Atkins on a 1-year deal. Nate is pretty much that fullback tight end option for you. Stepped up in a big way. He was obviously injured a little bit this past season, but not bringing back Prentice, not bringing back Burton. Again, a versatile guy that can play inside or out. So we're going to bring him back on a 1-year deal as well. And we're going to let everyone else walk, and you'll see why we're going to let most of these other guys walk. Maybe we sign some of these guys back, late in the offseason, or towards training camp, but that's not a part of all this. This is kind of just ends after the draft. So, we need to add to the running back room. And with J.K. Dobbins, he's a guy that we could bring back. He looked great for us, but the injury concerns, every year he's been injured. It's just so concerning for me. And, I know he's 28 years old. He's getting towards that 30 mark for running backs that people get a little scared of. So I think we should move on from him. And I think that we should go after a guy named Breece Hall. I think Breece Hall would be, he would add so much layers to this offense, because not only is he, a bigger back that can run between the tackles, he's got the speed to get around the edge, and he can also add so much as passing, the passing game. And that's what, Alvin Kamara was for Sean Payton, and Sean Payton was seeking with RJ Harvey. I think that Breece Hall could be a 1,000 guy in this offense. He could have 1,000 rushing yards and 1,000 receiving yards. So we're going to give him a 3-year deal, $12.7 million a year. Spotrac has his market value about $10.3 million. I think that's probably a little low. I think 12.7 is more, a more fair number for a back like this. 25 years old, you get him for 3 more years, maybe re-sign him for another year or 2 after that. But I think this is a home run ad to this offense, and makes Bo Nix's life 10 times easier. So we'll confirm that signing. And, with adding A.J. Brown, with adding Breece Hall, there could be talks about maybe we need to add a tight end. We kept Evan Ingram. I don't really like spending money on, look at this tight end, Dallas Goedert, $12 million, Kyle Pitts, $14 million, Cade Otton, $14 million. I don't love going after any of these guys. I think they're quality players, but I believe in Evan Ingram. Again, he's under contract. I think that he could step up, with Davis Webb calling plays this coming season. We saw what he could do with Davis calling plays in the Arizona Cardinals preseason game. So I like our tight end room. I think maybe we add to it in the draft. You're betting on Caleb Lohner's upside, but you have Nate Atkins. Maybe you bring back one of these guys later, but again, these are going to be guys that you can get, post draft that will come back and contribute for you. But the other position that I want to add to, you know, first let's talk about the defensive line, right? John Franklin Myers, would be awesome to bring back. I think he's kind of outpriced himself from us, and I think there's just kind of a schism in the relationship, and I don't see him being back. I know he was an awesome gift for us for not a ton of draft capital, and has been really really great on the defensive front. But I think we can get something in the draft. There's a couple guys that I have in mind that would be good replacements for him. So we're going to go to the linebacker position. And with Justin Sternad and Alex Singleton hitting for agency, it kind of being time to move on from them. They are both a kind of a liability in the passing game. They're good thumpers. Sternad, obviously, a great special teams player, but Sternad's not going to come back unless he's going to get a starting opportunity, because he can get a starting opportunity elsewhere. And Singleton, I just think, he's been great in the run game, but you can get a lot better. And if you look at the Seattle Seahawks defense, right, you know, they went out and got better by adding a guy like Ernest Jones. They didn't, stay stagnant. And I think that's what Denver needs to do by adding a guy into Kobe Dean. And I talked about this bit on my TikTok. Go check it out, Orange_Crushin It on TikTok. I talked about why he's such a great fit. And there's so many layers to it. But, he's a young guy. He can cover pretty well. He's got great pursuit. He's a great blitzer. And at 26 years old, three years, $15 million. Spotrac has his value about half this. I think that's absurd. $7.9 million doesn't seem like you'll be able to get a guy like Nakobe Dean. Maybe they're factoring in some of the injuries that he dealt with last season, but I think it was a bit of a lingering thing for the playoffs. He came back very strong and didn't have any setbacks. Dre had some setbacks, and we're keeping him around. Take a shot on this guy. He's a lot younger too. I like what we can get into Kobe Dean here. So there's your other starting inside linebacker. That's pretty much it in free agency. We got $24 million to roll into next year with about, there's some future risks there, but I think that, this can be used to re-sign some guys in the coming seasons that might be hitting free agency. So I would just roll it over. I wouldn't splurge on all of it. I would use some of this in free agency, but keep some. So moving into the draft, right? We have a first round pick, a third, 2 fourths, 2 fifths, and 3 sevenths. No second, obviously, with trading away that pick to the Philadelphia Eagles for AJ Brown. And you look at our roster right now. If it'll load, you got RJ Harvey. Let's get Cody Schrader out of here. You got Breece Hall, right, as your starting back. AJ Brown becomes your wide receiver 1 if he'll move. All right. Well, this tool, long press is not great for the computer, better on the phone. But, you got AJ Brown as wide receiver 1, Cortland Sunday or 2, Mims as your third, and your gadget kind of guy. Tight end is a room that we can add to. Offensive line, more depth here. Defensively, right, the defensive front, Roach is more of that backup nose tackle, so you need another end to replace Myers. We got Dean, maybe a little bit more depth at linebacker with the injuries that Dean, Greenlaw, Sanders have all dealt with. You got Lavelle Bailey, and then maybe some corner with Riley Moss on his way out, or safety as well, with PJ Locke on his way out. So, there's a couple. We got a ton of draft capital, couple positions to fill, but nothing too dire outside of defensive line. And that's the position I want to highlight first. And we'll go through a 7-round draft. Start this up. And here at pick 30, Caleb Banks, and that's the guy I wanted there. I've run through this mock a couple of times. He falls to us most of the times. Sometimes he goes a little bit before us. Caleb Banks is, I think, the ideal prospect to kind of fill in that role for JFM. 6'6", 334, a big body guy. JFM's a big body guy as well. Very athletic guy. I think that he had a strong showing at the Senior Bowl as well. For me, I mean, this guy, he could elevate this defense to another level, right? As a young, athletic, just high motor guy as a replacement for JFM. Obviously, it's hard to replace JFM, but when you can add a guy like this. That's pretty damn awesome. So, we'll take Caleb Banks and know that we're not going to get a pick till the third round now, but we got a premier talent at pick 30. And I wouldn't hate trading up for him either. Like I said, if you don't have to give up too much or you give up something next year, so be it. But you got to take advantage of that window now. Now, this is a guy, Jacob Rodriguez, that I absolutely love. Tune into the Jenks Island podcast in a couple weeks to hear us talk about linebackers. Me, myself being a former Division III linebacker, Jacob Rodriguez, I love him. He is a gritty guy. He's always getting the ball, nose in the ball, fumbles, picks. That guy, he's just an absolute stud. But we're going to look at the offensive line position because, like I mentioned, we brought back Palczewski on a one-year deal to be our starting guard. But you could use some more depth there. Maybe he isn't the starting guard at the end of the day. Maybe he's better as the swing guy. So you go out and you add a guy like a Kenyon Rutledge from Georgia Tech, who is a more run-heavy team. Obviously, they like to run with their quarterback as well, Haynes King. Not quite the offensive, the offense that they used to be, where it's the triple option, where he's a pure, run blocking guy. But he's definitely a mauler, 6'4", 330. I like the frame there as well. He could be the guy that comes in and competes with Palczewski. And I think you need a guy to compete with Palczewski to bring out the best of these two. Obviously your other guard is locked down by Quinn, but I like adding a guy like Kenyon Rutledge here. In the third round, too, I think that's really good value because he's probably one of the better guards. I could see him being a second-round pick. Our next pick is going to be in the fourth round. And, there's a couple of different ways that we can go here. We talked about corner. We talked about maybe linebacker depth, tight end. I'll show us the tight end. Delp is pretty good. I like him, but I think, we could get some good value later on. At linebacker, there's some good players here. I'm gonna go with this guy though at cornerback out of Georgia, Jalen Everett. Very fast guy, 6'1", 190, projected to run a 4.3, 4.40. He's the type of guy that he might not start for you day one, right? And there's no expectation for him as a fourth-round pick to start for you day one with the guys you have in that room with Chris Ames-Drain, John A. Barron, Jaquan McMillan back, and Pat Surtain. This guy kind of becomes your fifth corner who is a special teams ace and has the potential to become, a starting corner down the line if McMillan walks away next offseason and Chris Ames-Drain eventually becomes a free agent or doesn't hit. First team all SEC championship MVP, right? This is a dog. He is a premier outside corner. So I think this will be a really good gift for us in the fourth round. And Denver's done a really good job of adding corners late. Again, look at Jaquan. He was undrafted. Riley, Chris Ames-Drain. I think that's another, spot that we can highlight and get another really good corner. The next one, we're going to go for linebacker here. We're going to go after Harold Perkins. I think, again, Denver's in a situation to start taking high upside athletes because you have all your starters, right? Early on, in the offseason, we signed Breece Hall, we signed Nakobe Dean, we brought back some of our starters and traded for A.J. Brown, brought in Kenyon Rutledge to be competition with Palczewski, and brought in Caleb Banks to be your starting D tackle to replace JFM. So now you're just in a position to add depth. And with the injuries we've seen, as mentioned with Greenlaw, with Sanders, and even Nakobe Dean, I think adding an elite athlete like this guy would be awesome. You give him some time to bulk up, right? The weakness needs to bulk up for taking out blockers. 6'1", 225. He's not expected to start right away. And he's going to go into a linebacker room with two dudes that are absolutely yoked, in Nakobe Dean and Dre Greenlaw, right? Nakobe Dean, I believe, is 5'11", 230. And Dre Greenlaw, again, look at the guy. He's an absolute physical specimen. So you can add a guy like this. He's got a little bit of that tweener to him too, right? Where he can play some of that outside, play some of that inside. Brings a lot of that versatility that Vance loves. And maybe he's just kind of your blitzing linebacker. So I think adding a guy like this in the fourth round, who, once upon a time was viewed as like a first-round talent, is an awesome get. So we skip into the fifth round now. And the fifth round, I think I want to target tight end now. And there's a guy, Dalen Bentley, who, is a really good blocker and can fill that Adam Troutman role for us, 6'5", 255, right? Let's see what he runs in the 40 time. But, obviously this is, pre-combine. Teammates with Caleb Loader. So, it comes in. Obviously, synergy doesn't matter too much there with two tight ends, but we've obviously seen him play with, I was scouted loaner last season. So I think that this could be a good fit right down the road from us too at Utah. Again, fills that Adam Troutman run blocking tight end role and can add a little bit to the passing game as well. Next up, I want to add to the safety room in a guy in Bishop Fitzgerald. Now, the Denver Broncos brought in the defensive backs coach from USC to be our defensive backs coach. So he got to work with Bishop Fitzgerald, a guy like Kamari Ramsey last season. And I almost think that Bishop Fitzgerald is better than Kamari Ramsey. I'm a big USC fan. I got to watch these two last year. Obviously, bit of a different players, but Bishop Fitzgerald, he always finds himself around the ball, whether it's forcing fumbles, interceptions. He is a big time player. I think that he would be a great replacement for PJ Locke, kind of a guy that I think at 5'11", 205 could play a little bit of dime linebacker, a little bit of deep box safety, kind of move him around. I love this pick. I was high on him before Denver brought in the USC D-backs coach. I'm even higher on it now. So a guy like him would be amazing to add to that defense. Just give you more depth, right? We need depth, especially with some of these guys outpricing us or just kind of, their time has come in Denver. Now we skip all the way into the 7th round where we have 3 7th-round picks. And here, again, you're taking more shots on guys that maybe have a little bit more upside, but, they're not going to be starters for you day one, more depth roles. Offensive tackle could be one. Jalen Farmer's a guy who I like, but he is not here right now. There's a couple other guys that maybe we can wait for a little bit later. We could look at the running back position. Le'Veon Moss is a great back. Noah Whittington is a great back. Kalen Black is a great back. For me, maybe it's a little early for him. I'm going to go with Kalen Black here. I think that, look at Indiana's offense. He was a thumper for them. Really hard to tackle, broke a lot of tackles this past season. And, running back right now for the Denver Broncos isn't necessarily a need, but if he can beat out a Jaleel McLaughlin and a Tyler Beatty, who are on one-year contracts, not guaranteed a job, he could bring another layer to this team. He's a gritty guy coming from Indiana, so, I think that he'd be willing to play a little bit of special teams for us as well. And if RJ Harvey, ultimately doesn't work out, Caleb Black can be that thumper to Breece Hall's, kind of do it all type of back mentality. So I like Kalen Black there, but I think that, he'd probably slot in as an RB3 for us, and that's perfectly fine. In the 7th round, you can get a guy that talented. I think that's pretty awesome. Next up, we're going to look at the offensive tackle position, I think. Kind of the same because I think we just picked about 4 picks ago. Again, I mentioned I like Jalen Farmer. This late in the draft, I don't know. It's hard to take an offensive tackle because I haven't had a chance to deep dive into the 7th round offensive tackles yet. But I know a guy like Ernest Green, played at a big school, a decent tackle. Maybe you use him as a developmental piece. Obviously, we're not asking this guy to become a starter day one, right? It's Matt Pert's replacement. 6'4", 320. Doesn't have the most ideal size. I want to see how long his arms are as well. But I think that he could be just a great backup tackle in the 7th round for us. And last but not least, going to go after a guy that I don't even know where he would be slotted on this 367, Eli Hendenrich. I think this is an opportunity for Denver to take another developmental prospect like they did with Caleb Lohner. This guy could be kind of a Taysom Hill-esque prospect, play a little fullback, receiver, running back, can kind of play all over. And Sean and Vance both love versatility. This guy, he'll be a special teams guy for you for sure. Knowing Navy guys, right? They are gritty as all hell. And so that's what you love to see. Maybe Nate Atkins, he's only on a vet minimum. Maybe this guy takes his spot. So we're going to go with Eli Henderich at the end of the 7th round. And we get an A offseason grade. I mean, pretty good cap health, filled all our needs. Our outlook is decent, and our roster moves were pretty good as well. So, let's look at the roster. I'll show you guys the depth chart view. We looked at it a little bit earlier. It's kind of hard because they don't adjust it for you. You got a long press and drag, and it's not as responsive. So I have something here for us. just to take a look at what the Denver Broncos starting offense will be next season with if we made all of these moves. So, we keep the offensive line pretty much the same. Pelcheski slots in at left guard like he did for most of his past, second half of the season with Ben Powers down. We add A.J. Brown as the wide receiver 1 and move Sutton to wide receiver 2. And I think it's a great move because Sutton, he's awesome. He's probably a top 20 wide receiver 1. He's the top 5 wide receiver 2, right? There's not many guys outside of maybe T. Higgins and, George Pickens that would be better. I think this room is probably better than Devonta Smith and A.J. Brown would be because Sutton really is just that type of a guy as a jump ball guy. And I think you take some of the pressure off him, you start to see some of those, less of those drops and mental lapses that we saw late in the season. You got Mims as your slot and your gadget guy. They like to use him out of the backfield. They like to use him in the slot. You still got Pat Bryan as your, kind of route running finesse guy. Troy Franklin as another burner. Mims, obviously the biggest burner for this team. And Ingram as your pass catching tight end. But the biggest add, I think, outside of A.J. Brown is obviously Breece Hall, right? Breece becomes your RB1 immediately. Maybe get in a 75-25 or 60-40 split with R.J. Harvey snaps-wise. But Breece is going to make this guy's job, Bo Nix, 10 times easier because he's going to, provide so much out of the backfield as a receiving back, can make guys miss, can break a ton of tackles. And then he's just a more reliable runner, more of a healthy guy than J.K. Dobbins was. And I think that, for this offense was something they missed desperately when J.K. went down is they didn't have a running back that they could truly rely on. Jaleel and RJ were great, but Breece Hall is, all pro level running back in this offense with the volume of carries that he's going to get, the volume of touches that he's going to get. Is at least a Pro Bowl type of running back. I mean, you saw J.K. was 3rd in rushing yards before he went down with injury. I think Breece Hall could be even better than that. So this is the offense, obviously with some of the depth pieces that I discussed. And then defensively, right, Caleb Banks fills that role left by JFM. Nakobe Dean takes this defense from great to all-time great level. And you bring, your nickelback in McMillan. You move Jade outside where I think he's, I think he's a great fit at either spot. But I think you don't draft a corner in the first round if he's going to be solely a nickel corner. So you move him outside or Chris Abrams-Drain competes. But I think that, this is probably what you would see the defense be with Chris Abrams-Drain as your depth piece, Bishop Fitzgerald, Harold Perkins, Drew Sanders, Lavelle Bailey, obviously then all the edge rushers that we have with Q Robinson stepping up, Dondre Tillman, blanking on Jonah Ellis as well, right? And you got some other depth pieces on the inside with DJ Jones, Malcolm Roach, and Savion Jones looking to develop as well. So, this is a Super Bowl caliber defense, but this is an all-time great defense, kind of looking like 2015 type of defense. And I think mostly changed by this guy right here, Nakobe Dean, because he brings an element to this defense that Alex Singleton and Justin Renard just quite honestly did not have. And, like I said, he's the green dot guy. He's the guy that takes this team to all-time great level defense. And your offense becomes a real threat because this past season it was a threat, right? But mostly because of this guy, Bo Nix, right? Outside of that, Dobbins goes down. A lot of the pressure goes back more on Nix, right? Sutton starts dropping things. Receivers get banged up. I mean, all the pressure fell on this guy, Bo Nix. All the pressure pretty much comes off him with A.J. Brown and Breece Hall, 2 guys that can make plays on their own. So overall, I mean, that I agree with that grade A, that they gave us for, our offseason that we assembled there. I think, this is just my ideal offseason, right? As we move into the offseason, there's a couple other guys that, I would love to have as well. So let me know in the comments, if there's any guys that maybe like Alec Pierce you'd rather have signed than trading draft capital or trading Riley Moss for A.J. Brown, or, if there's someone else that you think Denver should target in the draft, right? Let me know your thoughts on, overall the team that I've kind of assembled for next season. Make sure you keep an eye out for, upcoming episodes of the Jenks Island podcast. Should be an episode dropping this week on the offensive line. We'll be breaking down, everyone ahead of the NFL draft and into the combine by position. All these different prospects, kind of giving you our different thoughts, different perspectives and some of our just top 5 at each position. Keep an eye out for the Current Heads podcast as well. Hammer has just started dropping some Green Bay Packers content. Keep an eye out for the Who Dat podcast as well. Jenks and STERB talk a ton about the New Orleans Saints and break down, some of the offseason moves that they would like to see for them. So definitely keep an eye out. We're definitely growing the Jenks Island production with all of our different teams and just trying to provide you guys as much content as we can for all of our different teams. And then obviously the collective podcast talking about all things NFL, highlighting some of the bigger, stories around the league. So make sure you leave a like, comment, and subscribe. Make sure you follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok on Orange Crushin It. It's Orange_Crushin It on TikTok and Instagram. And on Twitter, X, it is just Orange Crushin It, no underscore. But thank you guys for tuning in. Really appreciate it. And I'll be looking to drop a couple more episodes over the rest of the offseason, just targeting, guys that we should look at in the draft and free agency. So thank you guys for tuning in again. And keep an eye out for the couple upcoming episodes of all of our podcasts.